They said, "Rabbi, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy them?" But Jesus turned and reprimanded them. In the name of the living God, amen. Please be seated. First came fear and sadness, and then came anger. It happened a little more than a week ago as I heard the news that the president was directing ICE to conduct deportation raids in 10 cities, including Los Angeles. It was simply put an act of domestic terrorism designed to weaponize fear for political gain. And the emotions began welling up inside me. First, fear. Fear for the beautiful children of God in our All Saints and the wider Pasadena community whose lives and families are now in grave danger. Fear that ICE will come for them and there will be nothing that we can do. Along with fear came sadness, deep sadness and grief that we have come to this as a nation. Deep sadness that this is a president who, in the words of Anne Lamott, shows no evidence of ever having been loved and is rapidly leading us down an increasingly craven and loveless road to self-destruction. Fear, sadness. These feelings were deep and uncomfortable. They made me feel powerless. They tempted me to hopelessness and despair. And so another emotion began to grow in my heart, one that took away the hopelessness and despair, one that made me feel powerful. I got angry. First fear and sadness, and then anger. I know them all so well, and I know you do too. They are old friends, and lately they have been coming out to visit again and again and again. They came out when Christine Blasey Ford boldly told her truth about being sexually assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh, and when countless courageous women have told their truth about being sexually assaulted by Donald Trump. And I realized that these men would join the ranks of so many others in never facing any consequences whatsoever for their actions. First fear and sadness, and then anger. They came out when I heard yet one more person I love has cancer. Cancer which may end their life far, far too soon. First fear and sadness, and then anger. And they came out this week when Juan Mejia, Flor Quintanilla, Sally Howard, and I talked on the phone with an amazing, strong mother who doesn't have the proper documentation to be in this country legally. She was terrified of what would happen to her child if ICE took her away forever. And at one point, as she stopped talking, and all we could hear through the speaker were her quiet sobs, those emotions came back inside me again. Fear and sadness, fear and sadness. I hated those emotions. I felt powerless and tempted to despair. And then came anger. I thought of the person and the people who were behind this, whose heartless actions had terrorized this courageous woman and driven her to her knees in tears. I thought of him, I thought of them, and the words from this morning's gospel echoed in my head, and I wanted to scream, "God, call down fire from heaven and destroy them." Fear, sadness, and anger. These are actually not bad things. They are important, natural human emotions that need to be felt, natural human responses to trauma, injustice, and evil, to having our very personhood denied, degraded, and endangered. And so I stand with you here this morning to say, as I look at what is happening all around us, I am afraid, and I am sad, and God knows I am angry. And there's another thing. I'm also tired. I'm tired of feeling this way. I am tired of it seeming like every day brings a new injustice. And I know that as tired as I am, there are so many others of us who are even more tired because you have been living with so many deeper traumas and injustices for much, much longer than me. And so I got to tell you, I am right there with James and John when they asked Jesus just this once, can we please call down fire from heaven and destroy them? It would feel so good. See how that even makes us feel when I say that? Yeah. And yeah, Jesus has an answer. He has an answer for James and John. He has an answer for you and me. And it's not a simple answer. Jesus does say no. Raining down fire is not the answer. But it's not a simple no. And it is how he says it and what he says after that are what I want to talk about this morning. So let's go back to the gospel. Luke's gospel tells us that Jesus reprimands the disciples. That word is incredibly important. The Greek epitomao is not a gentle response. This isn't Jesus saying, no, I don't think so. It is sharp, and yes, it is even an angry response. Yes, Jesus is saying that raining down fire is not the answer. And in how he said it, he is meeting and embracing James and John in their anger. Jesus does not tell James and John that their anger is wrong or even misplaced. He meets them there. He shares their rage, affirms it, anoints it, even as he forbids them to hatred and violence against people because of it. I cannot stress enough how important this is. You see, the church historically has had two attitudes towards anger, and both have been really destructive. One is espousing the anger that calls down fire from heaven and believing that the church is the instrument on earth of that anger. It is the church of the Crusades, the church of self-righteousness justifying violence against people, the church of a God who hates and punishes and whose anger rains fire down on the very people in creation that God supposedly loves. Now, empire loves this church because it is so easy to use anger to divide and control and enslave the people for its own ends. And yet the church's other historic attitude toward anger has in some ways been equally as destructive. It is the attitude that anger is incompatible with love, that we should suppress and be ashamed of anger. Now, empire loves this as well because it tells people suffering from injustice and oppression that Jesus says they have to be nice, docile, and harmless in their forgiving of their oppressors. Don't get mad, just love, just forgive. No matter what I do to you, you can't get angry at me because anger is unchristian and Jesus wouldn't like that. And yet Jesus, in this morning's gospel, calls both of these attitudes out as lies. Jesus absolutely denies the call to hatred and violence against people, and Jesus is angry. And Jesus is angry because Jesus is human. And anger is not a human failing, but a natural human response to trauma and injustice and evil. Now, anger can be scary, especially for those of us who have had anger violently turned against us. There can be an unpredictability and power to anger that can be truly terrifying and that can cause us to fear and avoid it at nearly all cost. And yet, in spite of this, anger is gift and blessing. It is one of our ways of telling ourselves that something is deeply, deeply wrong and needs to change. Anger is how we know that enough has become too much. Stonewall happened because of anger. Selma happened because of anger. Apartheid fell because of anger. Anger is a necessary part of love because we should be angry when those whom we love are denied, injured, or oppressed. Because love heals. And anger is one of our primary ways of telling ourselves that there is some deep healing needed and somebody had better start getting to work on it right now. Anger is a feeling that needs to be felt, and there will never be justice and healing until it is. It is good and right and natural to be angry, and raining down fire is not the answer. Truthfully, raining down fire is the easiest way out. We know how to do it. We do it all the time. Social media makes it incredibly easy. It's not only the terrible tendency of the oppressed to become the oppressor, it is the demonizing of individuals instead of the dismantling of systems. It is accountability for evil actions through retribution instead of restoration. It is the proliferation of hate in the name of defending the cause of love. And it is such a seductive choice because it makes us feel powerful and righteous. It is a seductive choice because it feels so good. We are called not to rain down fire on each other, because we know, as Dr. King says, the ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence, you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie nor establish the truth. Through violence, you may murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. So if not fire, then what? What do we do with the fear, the sadness, and the anger? We make space for it. We feel it deeply. We hold each other as we share it, and then we channel the fear, the sadness, and the anger into deep revolutionary love. Deep revolutionary love doesn't suppress anger. It amplifies the voices of the fearful, the sad, and the angry, so the truth of those emotions can awaken and transform the hearts of those who are causing the pain and those who stand idly by allowing the pain. Deep revolutionary love is looking deep into the eyes of those with whom we disagree and even who are wounding God's children, and instead of asking disparagingly, "What is wrong with you?" asking compassionately, "What happened to you?" Deep revolutionary love is not violent, but neither is it peaceful. It is disruptive in its demand that truth be told, heard, and done. Deep revolutionary love is not the weaponization of the fundamentalisms of the right or the fundamentalisms of the left or the comfortable capitulations of the center. Deep revolutionary love is demanding nothing short of the truth that equity is a prerequisite for reconciliation and that restoration, not retribution, is the only justice that will ever lead to peace. Deep revolutionary love is resisting the temptation to demonize the oppressor every bit as much as we resist the oppression itself, and reaches for a communion of mutual healing across our deepest divides. And finally, deep revolutionary love is willing to pay the price not just of solidarity with the oppressed, but of being rejected even by those whom we have counted friends and allies in the struggle, who choose the easier road of raining fire rather than the harder and ultimately more rewarding road of love. That's what those stories of the three travelers who wished to follow Jesus tell us. That if we are to follow the path of deep revolutionary love, we can expect not only to be in solidarity with the homeless and the destitute among us, we can expect even those closest to us to consider us betrayers of the causes that together we hold most dear, because we insist on seeing those who oppress as hearts to be converted and not enemies to be defeated. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, whose conviction that the evil of the Third Reich must be resisted, in his case, even to the point of a violence he still believed was contrary to the teachings of Christ, wrote that when the state is unjust, there are three forms the church's response of deep revolutionary love can and must take. First, the church can and must hold a mirror up to the state and force it to examine its actions in light of its values and responsibilities. Second, the church can and must aid the victims of state action, bringing compassionate and healing care to those who are being targeted and wounded. And finally, Bonhoeffer wrote what is usually translated as the church's call not just to bandage the victims crushed under the wheel of the state, but to jam a spoke into the wheel itself, disrupting and breaking the very systems of oppression and injustice. Those final words have been widely quoted, both because they are wise and because, much like the anger that fear and sadness raises in our hearts, the idea of us being those champions who ram that spoke into the wheels of injustice makes us feel righteous and powerful. And there is an alternate translation of Bonhoeffer's German, one that notes that most popular translation actually doesn't make sense. Spokes are not what destroy a wheel. Spokes are what hold a wheel together. To put a spoke in a wheel would actually help it function better. This alternate translation notes that the object of the verb is not the wheel, but the spokes. That what Bonhoeffer is calling the church to do is to throw itself into the spokes of the wheel to stop the state's injustice. Now, I can neither read German, nor do I have any special knowledge of what Dietrich Bonhoeffer was thinking. And I will say that this translation is much truer not only to Bonhoeffer's life, but to the model of Christ. And it holds in its hands our challenge as All Saints Church for this present moment. There are beautiful children of God living in cages right now. There are beloved images of God trembling in fear for their lives right now. And we are sad, and we are afraid, and we are angry, and that anger is moving us to action. That anger is calling us to the actions of deep revolutionary love. As All Saints Church, we can and we have held the mirror up to the state, condemned these acts, and called the state to examine its actions in light of its values and responsibilities. We can be proud of that. That is being a church of courageous justice. In declaring ourselves a sanctuary church, and in setting up structures for meeting the physical, spiritual, legal, and other needs of those among us who fear for their lives, we are bringing compassionate and healing care to those who are being targeted and wounded. And we can be proud of that. That is being a church of courageous justice. Both of these things are wonderful and important. And yet alone, they are not sufficient to stop the wheel from crushing God's beloved. The systems that have created and perpetuated these atrocities are supported by the economic, social, political, religious, media, educational, and military structures that undergird our very society. The injustice is hardwired into the same systems that sustain our lives. Petitions, visuals, and all the other actions of protest, important as they are, and yet fall short of the transformative power of real sacrifice, will never by themselves stop the wheels of injustice from continuing to crush God's beloved. And so if we are fully to be a church of courageous justice, our greatest joy will be to let our fear, our sadness, and our anger lead us to Bonhoeffer's most difficult and rewarding challenge of deep revolutionary love. How are we, as All Saints Church, called out of deep revolutionary love for all God's children to throw ourselves on the spokes of the wheel of injustice? How are we called to the kind of revolutionary love that does not demonize the other but transforms and heals us all? How are we as All Saints Church called to the kind of action that is revolutionary precisely because it shows that we are willing to risk everything for the sake of those who stand to lose everything? To join Jesus and those with whom we stand in solidarity in having no safe place to rest our head. I do not know how we are to throw ourselves on the spokes of this wheel, only that is what we must do. Because people are dying, and our safe compassion, though wonderful and truly healing, is not enough to stop it. I do not know how we are to throw ourselves on the spokes of this wheel, only that is what we must do. Because we are all so deeply tired of being in this place of fear, this place of sadness, this place of anger without end. I do not know how we are to throw ourselves on the spokes of this wheel, only that is what we must do, and that together with others who share this vision of the power of deep revolutionary love, we have the capacity to discover it, the courage to accomplish it, and the power to make the world anew. Amen. Thank you.